Some women lose their voice long before they lose their marriage. The sound of crystal shattering cut through Blackwood Grill at exactly 8:42 p.m. Conversation stopped. Forks froze midair. Even the piano player near the grand staircase missed a note. Claire Bennett pressed one trembling hand against her 8-month pregnant belly while red wine slowly dripped from the edge of the white linen tablecloth onto the polished marble floor beneath her chair. Across from her sat Ethan Blackwood, billionaire real estate mogul, his silver cufflinks gleaming beneath the chandelier light as if nothing had happened at all. His expression stayed cold. Controlled. Almost bored. "You could have stayed quiet for one night," he muttered, adjusting the sleeve of his tailored navy suit, while dozens of wealthy strangers stared from across the restaurant. Claire felt heat rising into her face, but it wasn't embarrassment anymore. It was exhaustion. The kind that builds over years of apologizing for things that were never your fault. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain hammered against downtown Manhattan in violent waves, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and white. Inside, the restaurant smelled like expensive whiskey, truffle butter, and tension thick enough to choke on. Claire swallowed hard and tried to steady her breathing. The baby moved sharply beneath her ribs, reacting to the stress the way she always did now. Her daughter could feel everything. Every raised voice. Every icy silence. Every crack forming inside her mother's heart. "Ethan," Claire whispered carefully, aware that every table nearby was listening now. "I only asked if you'd be home for the doctor appointment tomorrow." Ethan laughed once under his breath, low and humorless. "And you thought this was the place to start another scene?" Around them, phones slowly appeared above candlelit tables. Tiny glowing screens. Silent witnesses. Claire noticed a young woman near the bar lower her eyes uncomfortably while an older couple exchanged the kind of look people share when they know they should say something but won't. Wealth had a way of making people quiet. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Completely relaxed now, as if public humiliation was simply another business negotiation he intended to win. "You used to know how to walk into a room without embarrassing me," he said softly. Somehow that hurt more than the shouting ever had. Claire stared at the untouched anniversary dessert between them. Chocolate mousse topped with gold flakes and 2 sugar swans facing each other beneath a tiny candle. "Happy anniversary" written in elegant cursive across the plate. 10 years together reduced to melted chocolate under restaurant lighting. Then she noticed him again. The waiter standing near the wine station. Tall. Dark suit. White gloves. Watching. Not casually. Not curiously. Watching Ethan with the kind of stillness that made the air feel strange. Claire had seen him before during previous visits to the restaurant. He always seemed to appear whenever Ethan's temper shifted. Quietly replacing broken glasses. Bringing water she hadn't ordered. Once, weeks ago, she'd caught him staring at the fading bruise near her wrist before immediately looking away. Tonight his jaw tightened slightly as Ethan stood from the table. "Sit down, Claire," Ethan said coldly, noticing her reach for her purse. "We're not finished." But the waiter had already started walking toward them. The waiter moved calmly through the sea of frozen faces while soft jazz music struggled to continue in the background like the restaurant itself did not know whether to breathe or panic. Claire wiped quickly beneath her eye before anyone could mistake exhaustion for weakness. She hated crying in public. Ethan noticed the movement and exhaled sharply through his nose, irritated more than concerned. "Do not make this dramatic," he said under his breath. "People are staring enough already." But people had been staring at Claire Blackwood for years. They stared at charity galas when she arrived alone while Ethan stayed surrounded by investors and models half his age. They stared at magazine covers where she smiled beside him wearing diamonds that felt heavier every year. They stared because from the outside she looked like every woman living a perfect Manhattan fantasy. Wealthy husband. Penthouse. Overlooking Central Park. Designer dresses. A baby on the way. The American dream wrapped in gold ribbon. Nobody saw the silence inside that apartment after midnight. Nobody saw Claire sitting alone in the nursery while Ethan traveled for another emergency meeting that somehow always appeared beside photographs of champagne bottles and nightclub lights online. Nobody saw her deleting messages from concerned friends because Ethan hated people interfering in their marriage. The waiter stopped beside the table and placed a fresh linen napkin gently near Claire's trembling hand. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady, "would you like some water?" Ethan answered before she could speak. "She is fine." The waiter did not move. Claire looked up for the first time and really saw him. Late 30s maybe. Broad shoulders beneath the fitted black uniform. Dark blonde hair combed neatly back. Sharp green eyes that carried the strange stillness of someone constantly watching the room for danger. There was something familiar there. Not his face exactly. More like a memory scratching against the inside of her mind. "Actually," Claire whispered softly, "water would be nice." Ethan's jaw tightened. The waiter nodded once and disappeared toward the bar while the tension at the table thickened like smoke. Across the restaurant, rain streaked down the giant windows in silver rivers. Thunder rolled somewhere over the city. Claire used to love storms. Before marriage. Before she learned how quickly beautiful things could turn heavy. Ethan picked up his wineglass slowly. "You know what your problem is?" he asked quietly. Claire already knew this tone. Calm voice. Dangerous words. "You think carrying a baby suddenly makes you untouchable." Claire felt her stomach tighten. Around them, wealthy strangers pretended not to listen while listening to every word. "I never said that," she answered carefully. "No," Ethan replied. "You just stopped understanding your place." The sentence landed harder than shouting. Claire lowered her eyes to the candle flickering between them. 3 years ago Ethan would have reached across the table and kissed her forehead when she looked anxious. 3 years ago he used to call her his lucky charm during interviews. 3 years ago he still looked at her like she was a person instead of a problem waiting to embarrass him publicly. The waiter returned carrying a crystal glass of ice water on a silver tray. Claire noticed his hand tighten slightly when Ethan leaned closer toward her. "Do you have any idea what investors think when they see my pregnant wife crying in a restaurant?" Ethan asked. "They think I cannot control my own household." Claire stared at him in disbelief. Household. Not family. Not marriage. Household. Like she was another expensive possession inside the Blackwood penthouse. The waiter set the water down carefully, but before stepping away his eyes drifted briefly toward Claire's wrist. The fading bruise hidden beneath her bracelet had become visible again beneath the chandelier light. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not shock. Recognition. Ethan noticed it too. "Is there a reason you are still standing here?" Ethan asked sharply. Nearby conversation stopped completely now. Even the piano music faded lower. The waiter straightened slowly. "I just wanted to make sure the lady was all right." Ethan gave a cold laugh. "My wife does not need attention from restaurant staff." Claire flinched slightly at the word wife. The waiter's eyes moved to hers again, softer this time. Then something unexpected happened. Claire saw emotion flicker across his face. Not pity. Pain. Real pain. As if watching her sit there hurt him personally. Her heartbeat quickened. Somewhere deep inside her memory, a little girl stood on a wooden dock beside a lake holding her older brother's hand during a summer thunderstorm. Green eyes. The same eyes. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Ethan stood abruptly from his chair and tossed his napkin onto the table. "We are leaving," he announced. Claire tried to stand too quickly and one hand instinctively moved to support her stomach. The room tilted for half a second beneath the chandelier lights. The waiter stepped forward immediately. "Careful." Ethan's face darkened instantly. "Do not touch her." The entire restaurant went silent as the waiter slowly lifted his eyes toward Ethan Blackwood and spoke for the first time without fear in his voice. "Then maybe you should start treating her like someone worth protecting." The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. Ethan Blackwood stared at the waiter as if he could not decide whether to laugh or throw him out personally. Around the restaurant, glasses stopped clinking. A woman near the fireplace slowly lowered her phone, though the recording light still glowed red against her fingertips. Claire felt her pulse hammering in her throat. Nobody had ever spoken to Ethan that way before. Not employees. Not business partners. Not even family. Especially not in public. Ethan stepped closer to the waiter, his polished dress shoes scraping softly across the marble floor. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. The waiter did not move. "Yes," he answered. "That is exactly why I said it." Claire inhaled sharply. Something inside Ethan's face shifted then. Not anger yet. Shock. Genuine shock that someone standing in a restaurant uniform would challenge him in front of Manhattan's elite. Ethan gave a slow, humorless smile and adjusted the platinum watch at his wrist. "Manager," he called without taking his eyes off the waiter. "Either remove this employee from my site or I will personally make sure this restaurant disappears before Christmas." Claire closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The voice she knew too well. Calm. Polished. Dangerous. Ethan never yelled when he truly meant harm. He became quieter. Colder. Like ice forming over deep water. Footsteps approached rapidly from the front entrance of the dining room. A tall man in a charcoal suit hurried toward the table, his expression tense beneath the chandelier glow. Claire expected panic. Apologies. Maybe security. Instead, the manager stopped beside the waiter and straightened his tie nervously. Then he looked directly at Ethan Blackwood and said words that changed the temperature of the entire room. "Sir, I strongly suggest you sit back down." Ethan blinked once in disbelief. "Excuse me?" The manager swallowed hard. "This man is Mr. Adrian Bennett." The name hit Claire like distant thunder. Bennett. Her maiden name. A name she had not spoken aloud in years because Ethan always said it sounded small town and forgettable. The waiter finally removed the white gloves from his hands with slow, deliberate movements. Claire stared at the scar across his right knuckle. A faded white line she suddenly remembered from childhood summers near Lake Michigan after her brother punched through an old fishing crate trying to protect her from neighborhood boys. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. No. It could not be. 12 years? 12 years since Adrian disappeared after their father's funeral. 12 years of unanswered letters and disconnected phone numbers and rumors about international business deals nobody could confirm. Claire had spent years believing her brother simply abandoned her. The manager continued nervously. "Mr. Bennett owns Blackwood Grill Hospitality Group." Nearby tables erupted into whispers so fast they sounded like rainfall spreading through the room. Ethan's confident posture faltered for the first time all night. "That is impossible," he said sharply. "I know the ownership structure of this chain." Adrian folded the gloves neatly onto the silver tray. "No," he replied calmly. "You know the public ownership structure." Claire stared at him in stunned silence. The green eyes. The quiet watchfulness. The strange feeling every time he appeared near her table during the past months. "Oh my God!" Ethan looked between them slowly now, calculation replacing anger inside his expression. "Claire," he said carefully, "you know this man?" But Claire could barely hear him anymore because memories were crashing into her all at once. Adrian teaching her to ride a bicycle beside the lake. Adrian sneaking pancakes into her room after their parents fought downstairs. Adrian promising at 16 years old that nobody would ever hurt her while he was alive. Then the accident. Their father dying suddenly. Adrian leaving town 2 weeks later after a brutal argument with debt collectors threatening the family business. Claire never saw him again. Until now. Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. Adrian noticed immediately. "Hey!" he said softly, his entire voice changing for the first time that night. "Do not cry. Not because of him." Ethan's jaw tightened violently at the intimacy of the moment unfolding in front of strangers. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. You disappear for a decade, then suddenly show up pretending to care about my wife? Adrian turned his eyes toward Ethan slowly. Your wife? He repeated quietly. Interesting choice of words for someone who brought another woman to this restaurant 3 nights ago. Claire froze. The room froze with her. Ethan's face lost color for half a second before hardening instantly. Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his black jacket and placed a small gold reservation card onto the table beside Claire's untouched dessert plate. Table 12. 2 guests. Ethan Blackwood. Vanessa Hale. Claire stared at the card as the candle between the sugar swans flickered weakly in the cold air from the storm outside. Somewhere behind the bar, thunder rolled across Manhattan again. Then Adrian looked directly at his sister and asked the question nobody else in her life had dared ask in years. Claire, how long have you been pretending this marriage is not breaking you? Claire looked down at the reservation card while the tiny candle beside her flickered weakly between the sugar swans. Ethan opened his mouth to explain, but another phone vibrated somewhere in the restaurant. Then another. Guests were staring at their screens now. A video had already started spreading online. The clip showed Ethan earlier that evening entering the restaurant lobby with Vanessa Hale laughing beside him beneath the headline Manhattan Billionaire's Secret Dinner Exposed. Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward her husband. For the first time in years, Ethan Blackwood looked afraid. Rain hammered harder against the glass walls of Blackwood Grill, while glowing phone screens lit the dining room like tiny spotlights pointed directly at Ethan Blackwood's collapsing empire. Claire could hear whispers spreading from table to table now. Not quiet whispers either. Sharp ones. Excited ones. The kind wealthy people pretend not to enjoy while secretly loving every second. Ethan reached for his own phone with controlled movements, but the second he unlocked the screen his expression tightened. The video was everywhere already. Social media pages. Gossip accounts. Financial blogs. One clip showed him stepping out of a black SUV earlier that night beside Vanessa Hale, his hand resting against the small of her back while photographers shouted questions from across the street. Another angle showed the two of them laughing together in the restaurant lobby nearly 40 minutes before Claire arrived for their anniversary dinner. Ethan immediately locked the phone again. Too late. The damage was done. Claire sat perfectly still while the world around her shifted into something unrecognizable. For years Ethan controlled every room he entered. Every interview. Every headline. Every investor meeting. He could silence rumors with one phone call and destroy careers with another. But tonight felt different. Tonight the room was no longer afraid of him. Adrian watched Ethan carefully from across the table, his expression calm in the way only truly powerful people could afford to be. You should probably sit down, Adrian said quietly. You are beginning to attract attention. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere near the bar before quickly disappearing. Ethan ignored it. His eyes locked onto Claire instead. This is not what it looks like, he said, lowering his voice again into that familiar polished tone that once made her believe every promise he ever spoke. Vanessa works with our Miami development team. Investors were present tonight. Claire almost laughed at the sentence. Almost. Instead, she stared at the melting anniversary dessert between them while something inside her slowly stopped hurting. It was a strange feeling. Not forgiveness. Not peace. More like numbness after standing too long in freezing rain. She touched your face in the lobby video, Claire said softly. Ethan's jaw flexed once. Claire, do not! Her voice surprised even her. Quiet. Firm. Stronger than it had sounded in years. Ethan fell silent immediately. Adrian noticed the shift too. Claire slowly lifted one hand to her stomach as the baby moved beneath her ribs again. Steady. Alive. Real. Suddenly the noise of the restaurant faded behind the sound of her own heartbeat. She thought about every moment she ignored her instincts over the past 2 years. Every cancelled vacation because Ethan was busy. Every business trip that somehow lasted longer than planned. Every night she sat awake in the penthouse nursery scrolling through photographs of smiling couples online, wondering why her marriage felt colder every month. She remembered the time Ethan snapped at her for gaining too much pregnancy weight in front of his business partner. The time he deleted numbers from her phone because he said her friends were distracting her from motherhood. The way she stopped playing violin because he once called it a hobby for college girls. One memory after another. Tiny cuts. Tiny humiliations. Tiny moments that seemed harmless until they stacked together high enough to bury a person alive emotionally. Across the restaurant, thunder cracked so loudly that several guests jumped in their seats. The chandelier lights flickered once overhead. Adrian leaned slightly closer toward Claire, lowering his voice. "I hired investigators 6 months ago." Ethan's head snapped toward him instantly. "What?" Adrian ignored him completely. "The first time I saw bruising near Claire's wrist, I knew something was wrong." Claire stared at her brother in disbelief. "You followed me?" "Protected you," Adrian corrected gently. "There is a difference." Ethan laughed sharply. "This is insane." Adrian finally turned his eyes toward him again. "No," he replied calmly. "What is insane is believing nobody would notice what you were becoming." Ethan took a threatening step forward, but the moment he did, 2 security guards quietly appeared near the private dining hallway. Claire noticed something almost funny then. Ethan noticed them too. For the first time all night, he hesitated. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket once more and placed a thin black envelope carefully onto the table beside Claire's water glass. Ethan's face immediately lost color. "You do not want to open that," he said quickly. Claire looked between them. "What is it?" Adrian's voice stayed calm. "Private. Investigation reports. Offshore accounts. Hidden property transfers. Payments connected to Vanessa Hale." The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Ethan lowered his voice dangerously. "You have no idea what you are interfering with." Adrian gave a small, almost disappointed smile. "Actually, Ethan, I know exactly what I am interfering with." Then he looked toward Claire again, softer this time. "Because when Dad died, I promised myself nobody would ever make you feel small again." Claire felt tears blur her vision instantly. 12 lost years. 12 years believing her brother abandoned her. Yet somehow he returned the moment she needed someone most. Ethan noticed the emotion passing between them and something desperate flashed across his face. Not love. Fear. Real fear. His phone suddenly vibrated again. Then again. Then again. Messages flooding in nonstop now. Investors. Board members. Public relations executives. Claire watched him glance at the screen and physically pale beneath the restaurant lighting. Adrian noticed too. "Oh," Adrian said quietly, almost sympathetically. "Looks like your board finally saw the video." The buzzing of Ethan's phone would not stop. Message after message lit the screen against the dim chandelier light, while rain slammed against the restaurant windows hard enough to sound like applause from the sky itself. Claire watched him stare downward, reading names she recognized instantly. Board members. Investors. Public relations executives. One message preview flashed across the screen before Ethan locked it again. Emergency board call. Immediate response required. Ethan inhaled slowly through his nose like a man trying to hold together a collapsing building with nothing but pride. Around the restaurant, conversations returned in nervous bursts. Wealthy strangers leaned toward each other pretending to whisper quietly while openly watching the disaster unfold at table 14. Claire suddenly realized something strange. Nobody was looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at Ethan. Adrian remained perfectly calm beside the table, one hand resting lightly against the back of an empty chair while security guards lingered quietly nearby. He did not look like a waiter anymore. He looked exactly like what he truly was. A man completely in control. Ethan finally slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and lowered his voice carefully. "This conversation has gone far enough." Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "Interesting timing." Ethan ignored him and focused entirely on Claire now. "Come home," he said quietly. "We will handle this privately." Privately. Claire almost laughed again at the word. Every painful thing in her marriage happened privately. Every insult delivered behind penthouse walls. Every cold silence during sleepless nights. Every moment Ethan made her feel difficult for asking basic kindness from the father of her child. Privacy had protected him for years. But tonight privacy was disappearing one phone notification at a time. Claire looked at the black envelope resting beside her untouched water glass. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the polished table surface beneath the candlelight. She barely recognized herself anymore. Pale face. Exhausted eyes. One hand instinctively supporting the life growing inside her while sitting in a room full of strangers watching her marriage collapse in real time. Adrian noticed her staring at the envelope. "You do not have to open it tonight," he said gently. Ethan immediately stepped forward. "She is not opening anything." The security guards shifted subtly again near the hallway entrance. Adrian's expression never changed. "You keep speaking for her," he replied softly. "That seems to be the problem." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Somewhere inside the restaurant, a wineglass shattered accidentally near the bar and several people jumped at the sudden sound. Her nerves felt stretched thin enough to break. Then another memory surfaced unexpectedly. She was 11 years old sitting beside Lake Michigan after getting bullied at school. Adrian sat next to her throwing stones into the water while she cried into her jacket sleeve. He told her something that day she never forgot. The people who love you should make you feel larger, not smaller. Claire slowly opened her eyes again and looked directly at Ethan. "Did you ever love me?" she asked quietly. The entire table fell silent. Ethan blinked once, clearly unprepared for the question. "Claire, it is a simple question." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not look away. "Did you love me or did you just love the version of me that never argued with you?" Ethan's polished confidence cracked for half a second. "Of course I loved you." "Loved." Past tense. Claire noticed immediately. So did Adrian. Ethan realized the mistake too late and corrected himself quickly. "Love. I love you." But the words sounded rehearsed now. Empty. Like lines memorized for investors instead of spoken from the heart. Claire looked down at her wedding ring. 10 years. 10 years reduced to a sentence that sounded like a corporate apology statement. Adrian quietly reached toward the black envelope and slid one document partially into view. Claire caught glimpses of printed photographs. Hotel entrances. Restaurant receipts. Wire transfers. Ethan's face hardened instantly. "Enough," he snapped. Several diners turned toward the raised voice. Adrian lowered the papers again calmly. "You know what the saddest part is?" he asked Ethan quietly. "You actually believed nobody would protect her." Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "And you think this is protection? Destroying her family publicly?" Adrian's eyes darkened slightly for the first time all night. "No," he answered. "You destroyed her family. Publicly." Silence crashed over the table again. Claire felt the baby move sharply beneath her ribs and instinctively pressed one hand against her stomach. Adrian noticed immediately. "How far along?" he asked softly. 34 weeks, Claire whispered. His expression shifted completely then. Protective. Emotional. The same look he had when she scraped her knees falling off a bicycle at age 9. Ethan saw it too and suddenly looked like an outsider watching a family reconnect without him. Another phone vibrated somewhere nearby. Then several more. Guests began staring toward the massive television mounted above the restaurant bar. Financial news. Live coverage. Ethan followed their gaze slowly and froze. His company logo filled the screen beneath a breaking headline. Blackwood Development stock falls after viral video scandal. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. The anchor continued speaking silently from across the room while closed captions rolled beneath the screen. Allegations of misconduct. Questions from investors. Emergency shareholder meeting rumored before market open. Ethan looked physically sick now. Adrian did not even glance toward the television. He simply looked at his sister and asked softly, "Claire, if you leave tonight, do you know where you would go?" Claire opened her mouth to answer but stopped. Because the horrifying truth was she did not know anymore. The penthouse belonged to Ethan's company trust. Most of her accounts were connected to his financial advisors. Her entire life had slowly become dependent on a man now unraveling in front of her. Adrian seemed to understand the realization passing across her face. "Then listen carefully," he said quietly. "You are not trapped anymore." The words settled over Claire like the first breath after years underwater. "You are not trapped anymore." She stared at Adrian while thunder rolled above Manhattan and the restaurant lights reflected softly across the tears gathering in her eyes. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He had always been skilled at reading weakness, fear, hesitation. But this expression on Claire's face confused him because it was none of those things. It looked dangerously close to freedom. "Claire," Ethan said carefully, lowering his voice again as if softness could still repair what arrogance had destroyed. "Do not make emotional decisions because of one bad night." One bad night. The sentence echoed through her mind with almost unbelievable cruelty. Claire slowly looked around the restaurant. The ruined anniversary dinner. The hidden affair exposed across social media. The years of humiliation wrapped inside polished apologies. One bad night. Adrian let out a quiet breath beside her. "That might be the most dishonest thing you have said all evening." Ethan ignored him completely. "You are pregnant," he continued firmly, focusing only on Claire now. "You need stability. Doctors. Security. A calm environment for the baby." Claire felt something cold twist inside her chest. Not fear anymore. Clarity. Ethan was not talking about love. He was talking about control. About assets. About appearances. Even now he spoke about her life like a business arrangement needing careful management. Claire lowered her gaze toward the wedding ring still resting on her finger beneath the restaurant lights. 10 years ago Ethan slipped that ring onto her hand in a vineyard overlooking Napa Valley while a string quartet played softly under white roses and candlelight. Back then he looked at her like she was the center of his universe. Or maybe she only wanted to believe he did. Adrian noticed her staring at the ring. Quietly, without pressure, he said, "You know Mom kept Dad's old lake house, right?" Claire blinked in surprise. "What?" Ethan's expression immediately darkened. Adrian nodded once. "I bought it back after the foreclosure auction 6 years ago." Claire stared at him speechless. The little blue lake house in Michigan had been the last place their family ever felt whole before debt and grief destroyed everything after their father died. Claire remembered summers there filled with bonfires, cheap lemonade, violin practice on the porch, and Adrian skipping stones across the water while promising she would someday play at Carnegie Hall. "You bought it back?" she whispered. Adrian smiled faintly for the first time all night. "Fixed the roof too. You always hated when it leaked during thunderstorms." Claire suddenly pressed trembling fingers against her lips because she could not stop the emotion rushing into her chest. Ethan saw it happening. Saw her remembering who she was before him. Before Blackwood Towers and charity galas and carefully controlled silence. Panic flickered behind his eyes again. "Claire," he interrupted quickly, "you are seriously considering leaving with a man you have not seen in over a decade?" Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "And yet somehow I still treated her with more respect tonight than you did." Several nearby diners shifted awkwardly in their chairs. Nobody pretended not to listen anymore. The restaurant had become a theater, and Ethan Blackwood was losing publicly in front of people who once envied him. Another notification buzzed across Ethan's phone. Then another. Finally he snapped, pulling the device from his pocket. Claire caught the reflection of headlines glowing across the screen. Investors demand statement. Blackwood board calls emergency session. Viral video reaches 12 million views. Ethan locked the phone again immediately, but the damage was written all over his face now. Adrian leaned slightly closer toward Claire and lowered his voice. There is more you do not know. Ethan's head jerked upward instantly. Do not. Adrian ignored him. 3 months ago, Ethan transferred ownership of your penthouse shares into a protected corporate trust connected to offshore accounts. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. What? Ethan stepped forward immediately. It was a tax strategy. Adrian's eyes hardened. No. It was preparation. Silence crashed over the table again. Claire stared at Ethan as memories suddenly rearranged themselves into something terrifyingly clear. The rushed paperwork he pressured her to sign during pregnancy exhaustion. The financial meetings he insisted were too complicated for her to understand. The way he always changed the subject whenever she asked about long-term security for their daughter. You planned this, Claire whispered. Ethan's voice sharpened defensively. I plan to protect my company. Adrian gave a cold smile. There it is. Claire slowly stood from her chair despite the ache in her lower back. The entire room seemed to stop breathing as she removed her wedding ring carefully from her finger. Ethan stared at the movement like he physically could not process what he was seeing. Claire placed the ring gently beside the untouched anniversary dessert. The tiny candle between the sugar swans had almost burned out now, leaving thin trails of smoke twisting upward through the chandelier light. Claire, Ethan said quietly, and for the first time all night there was no arrogance left in his voice. Only desperation. Real desperation. But Claire looked at him differently now. Not as the man she loved. Not as the billionaire who controlled her world. Just a frightened stranger watching his power disappear. Adrian stepped beside his sister protectively as thunder shook the windows once more above Manhattan. Then Claire spoke the words that finally shattered the illusion Ethan Blackwood spent years building around himself. I think I stopped loving you the moment I started being afraid to speak honestly around you. For a moment nobody moved. The rain outside softened into a low steady rhythm against the glass while the candle smoke curled upward between Claire and the man she once believed would protect her forever. Ethan stared at the wedding ring resting beside the ruined dessert plate like it was something impossible. Around the restaurant, wealthy strangers sat frozen beneath golden chandelier light watching a billionaire lose the one thing his money could not control anymore. Claire felt strangely calm now. Not because her life was falling apart. Because for the first time in years she finally understood the truth. Her marriage had not shattered tonight. It had been cracking quietly for a long time. Tonight was simply the first moment she stopped pretending not to hear it breaking. Ethan stepped closer carefully, lowering his voice again as if intimacy alone could erase humiliation. Claire, listen to me. She looked at him but did not answer. You are emotional right now, he continued. This entire situation has been manipulated. Adrian gave a soft, humorless laugh beside her. Still blaming everyone except yourself. Impressive. Ethan ignored him completely. You are carrying my daughter, he said firmly. Do you really want her growing up inside scandal and chaos? Claire slowly folded her arms over her stomach protectively. I do not want her growing up believing silence is the price of love. The sentence landed like ice water across the table. Ethan visibly flinched. Not because she raised her voice. Because she finally sounded certain. Somewhere near the bar a television anchor continued speaking about Blackwood development, while stock prices flashed red across the screen beneath financial headlines. Claire noticed several businessmen discreetly leaving the restaurant now while typing rapidly into their phones. Nobody wanted to be photographed near disaster. Ethan noticed too. Panic sharpened his breathing for the first time all evening. His phone vibrated again. Then again. Finally he answered. What? He snapped quietly before forcing his tone lower. No. Nobody speaks publicly until legal approves a statement. Claire watched his expression darken further with every passing second. What do you mean suspended? He whispered. Adrian glanced toward the restaurant windows as lightning briefly illuminated Manhattan in white silver flashes. Board members move fast when money starts disappearing, he said calmly. Ethan ended the call abruptly and looked at Adrian with open hatred now. You orchestrated this. Adrian remained completely still. No. I simply stopped protecting you from consequences. Claire looked between them while pieces of the night finally aligned in her mind. The hidden investigators. The restaurant ownership. The timing. Adrian had not randomly appeared tonight. He had been watching for months, waiting for the moment Ethan exposed himself publicly enough that Claire could finally see the truth without excuses clouding it. You planned this dinner? Ethan accused quietly. Adrian shook his head once. You planned the affair. I just knew eventually arrogant men stop hiding. Claire felt the baby move again beneath her hands. Strong. Restless. Alive. She suddenly imagined her daughter years from now watching this exact kind of marriage from inside a beautiful penthouse filled with silence and fear disguised as luxury. The thought made her stomach turn harder than any scandal ever could. Ethan saw the shift in her face and immediately changed tactics. Softer voice. Sad eyes. Carefully controlled vulnerability. Claire, he whispered, I know I made mistakes. But we can fix this privately. Therapy. Time away from the city. Whatever you want. Adrian looked almost disgusted now. Interesting, he murmured. You only discovered humility once your stock price collapsed. Ethan spun toward him sharply. Stay out of my marriage. Adrian's expression finally hardened completely. You lost the right to call it a marriage when she became afraid to speak honestly around you. Silence swallowed the table again. Claire looked toward the massive rain-streaked windows overlooking Manhattan. Her reflection stared back faintly against the dark glass. White dress stained with wine. Tired eyes. One hand protecting her unborn daughter while standing between the brother she lost and the husband she no longer recognized. Then something unexpected happened. A young waitress approached quietly holding a folded cashmere coat. Mrs. Blackwood, she said softly, almost nervous. The weather is getting worse outside. Mr. Bennett asked me to bring this for you. Claire touched the coat gently. Warm. Safe. Thoughtful. Such a small gesture. Yet Ethan had not noticed she was cold once all night. Tears burned behind her eyes again, but this time they came from grief more than pain. Grief for the woman she used to be before she learned to accept emotional starvation as normal. Ethan saw the tears immediately and stepped forward. Claire. She looked up slowly. No, she whispered. One word. Barely audible. But final. Ethan froze completely. Adrian moved beside his sister without touching her, giving her space instead of control. Another flash of lightning illuminated the dining room as thunder rolled across the skyline. Then the television above the bar interrupted regular programming entirely. Breaking news. Blackwood Development CEO faces internal investigation. Claire watched Ethan's face lose the last remaining traces of confidence. Investors were abandoning him publicly now. Board members were turning. Reporters were circling. And for the first time in his entire life, Ethan Blackwood looked like a man realizing power could disappear overnight. Claire slowly picked up the black investigation envelope from the table. Then she looked directly at her husband and asked the question that finally drained all color from his face. How many lies were you planning to tell our daughter about me once I was gone? The question hung in the air like the final crack before glass breaks completely. Ethan stared at Claire across the candlelit table, while rain streamed down the restaurant windows behind him in silver rivers. For once he had no immediate answer. No polished explanation. No carefully rehearsed defense. Claire watched the silence expose him more honestly than words ever could. Around them, Manhattan's elite sat frozen beneath warm chandelier light, pretending not to witness the collapse of a billionaire who built his entire life around control. Ethan finally exhaled slowly and lowered his eyes. You do not understand how complicated things became, he muttered quietly. Adrian gave a faint bitter smile beside Claire. Men always call betrayal complicated when they finally get caught. Ethan ignored him, but the arrogance that once filled every movement was gone now. He looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Like the room itself had stopped bending around his ego. Claire held the black envelope tightly against her chest while the baby shifted beneath her ribs again. 34 weeks. Soon she would become a mother. The realization settled differently now. Not with fear. With urgency. Her daughter deserved more than beautiful lies wrapped inside expensive apartments. She deserved warmth. Safety. Honesty. The kind of love that did not disappear the moment a woman stopped being convenient. Ethan looked at her carefully. Claire, please. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Please. Not an order. Not a correction. A plea. But Claire remembered too many nights sitting alone inside the penthouse nursery while he ignored her tears behind business calls and glowing phone screens. She remembered apologizing after arguments she did not start simply because silence from Ethan felt colder than winter. She remembered shrinking herself piece by piece trying to become easier to love. Adrian stepped quietly toward the window, giving his sister space to choose for herself. That alone made Claire emotional again. He was protecting her without controlling her. Ethan never understood the difference. Somewhere near the bar, financial reporters continued discussing Blackwood development, while stock numbers bled red across giant television screens. Investors had already begun distancing themselves publicly from Ethan's scandal. One headline rolled slowly beneath the anchor desk. Blackwood board to vote on. Temporary removal of CEO position. Ethan saw it too. His shoulders tightened visibly beneath the tailored suit that once made him look untouchable. Claire suddenly realized something important. Ethan was terrified not because he lost her. He was terrified because the world was finally seeing him clearly. The realization hurt less than she expected. Maybe because deep down she had already mourned this marriage long before tonight. Claire slowly removed the cashmere coat from her shoulders and folded it gently over one arm. Then she looked at Ethan one final time. I spent years believing love meant endurance, she said softly. I thought if I stayed patient enough, quiet enough, supportive enough, things would eventually feel warm again. Ethan opened his mouth, but Claire continued before he could interrupt. But love should not make someone disappear inside themselves. The restaurant remained completely silent now except for distant thunder and the soft clinking of ice behind the bar. Even strangers looked emotional watching her speak. Claire glanced toward Adrian. You asked earlier if I knew where I would go. Adrian nodded once. Claire inhaled deeply. I think I do now. Ethan's face paled immediately. Claire. She gently lifted one hand, stopping him. I am done begging for basic kindness from someone who should have given it freely. The words were calm. Not angry. Somehow that made them final. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but no language remained strong enough to rebuild what had already collapsed publicly beneath the weight of truth. Adrian stepped beside his sister again as she carefully moved away from the table. One of the waitresses quietly handed Claire a small umbrella near the front entrance while several guests subtly lowered their phones out of respect. The atmosphere inside the restaurant had changed completely now. Earlier people watched for entertainment. Now many watched with something closer to shame because they recognized pieces of their own silent unhappiness reflected in Claire's story. Before reaching the doors, Claire paused briefly and turned back one last time. Ethan still stood beside the ruined anniversary table beneath. Flickering candlelight and unfinished apologies. The wedding ring remained beside the melted dessert exactly where she left it. Alone. Claire looked at him quietly for several long seconds. Then she smiled sadly. Not cruelly. Just sadly. Like someone finally accepting the truth after years of fighting it. I hope our daughter learns strength from me, she whispered softly. Not power from you. Then she walked away. Adrian opened the restaurant doors as cold rain filled the entrance with the smell of thunder and wet pavement. Manhattan glowed silver beneath the storm while camera flashes sparked somewhere across the street as reporters gathered outside. But Claire did not look at them. She stepped into the rain beside her brother and felt something she had not felt in years. Relief. Real relief. Behind her, Ethan Blackwood remained standing alone beneath golden restaurant lights while television screens continued reporting the collapse of his empire in silence. 6 months later, Claire Bennett sat backstage at Carnegie Hall wearing a simple navy dress while her newborn daughter slept peacefully nearby in a wicker bassinet. The distant sound of applause echoed through the hallway after her violin performance ended. Adrian leaned quietly against the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee while snow drifted softly beyond the city windows. Claire looked toward the stage lights one final time and smiled. Some women survive storms quietly. Then one day they stop surviving and finally begin living again.